We now understand how it is people have breakthrough ideas.
What should we do to better generating insight?
There's research showing, it's a couple of years old now, but there's research showing that if you can see your phone, even if it's off, there's a measurable drop in IQ.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The only way you don't get a measurable drop in IQ is if your phone is off and you can't see it.
What exactly did you help Microsoft? What did they change?
It's about trying to get better at things rather than trying to look good. It's about trying to always improve rather than prove that you're, good or bad at something.
Hello and welcome to Vietsuccess podcast on business. This is Quốc Khánh, your host, and today I'm gonna welcome a very special guest calling from Australia. He is the co-founder and CEO of NeuroLeadership Institute. For now, this institute has advised over 60% of the Fortune 100. And with their presence in over 24 countries for now, they bring neuroscientists and leadership experts together with the goal of making organization better for everyone through science. My guest today has published many books, including Your Brain at Work, a business bestseller, and he has written many articles about leadership on Harvard Business Review, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, Fortune, etc. For now, NeuroLeadership Institute's program and services includes executive coaching, leadership development programs, workshops, and assessments designed to help individuals and organizations leverage neuroscience insight to enhance their performance and achieve their goals. So such an honor to welcome Dr. David Rock, co-founder and CEO of NeuroLeadership Institute. Hello, David. How are you?
Hello, Khan. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I know you have been in Vietnam before. Well, how was the trip?
I was really surprised and delighted. I was there for about a month. It was a long time ago, but I guess I had some expectations or opinions that were completely incorrect. From afar, and I found the country much more beautiful than I imagined. The people are much more friendly, and I just had an amazing time. I stayed for a month in Ho Chi Minh and also went up to Hoi An for some weeks and toured the countryside. A beautiful country and very passionate and resourceful people who have a great way of life. I think it was only recently that I stopped drinking drip filter coffee with sweetened condensed milk. It was a favorite for a long time.
Very glad to hear. Definitely want to see you back here sometime in the future. Let's get right into the main topic today. You are the father of the term neuroleadership. Tell me more about the connection between neuroscience and leadership development.
Yeah, it's kind of obvious when you see it in hindsight, but for the longest time, no one was thinking about this. I mean, very simply, leadership is the art of thinking and making decisions and trying to influence other people's thinking, right? That's what it is. It's influencing people through language and actions. So it really all happens in the brain. And so neuroleadership is the study of the brain as it relates to leadership activities. So we're not trying to measure a leader's brain. We're not trying to predict who will be a good leader. What we're doing is basically like studying leadership tasks, like making decisions. We're studying these tasks through the lens of how do we maximize those tasks by understanding the brain. So it's literally looking at what does a leader have to do and then thinking about the brain in relation to that task to improve that task, whether it's, hiring someone, trying to motivate someone, trying to deliver some kind of change. It's understanding the brain so you can be more effective day to day as a leader.
So by understanding your brain, I mean, over the last almost 20 years of doing research, what seemed to be the most surprise for you when you discover about our brain ability?
Well, to be honest, some of the things that we discover when we do research, some of the things we discover are confirming some hunches. So there's a lot of research we do that ends up confirming a hunch, but that is actually very useful in itself. Like we found, we now understand how it is people have breakthrough ideas. We know that this moment of insight, this aha moment, comes from deep in the brain, and the signals are very, very quiet, so that you need to kind of quiet the overall brain in order to have more, big ideas. Now, people have sort of known that intuitively for a long time. If you pay attention, you'll notice you have ideas in the shower and as you wake up and when you go for a run, But the fact that we now understand the mechanisms to kind of confirm this hunch makes you much more confident in building a strategy for yourself or for others to be more creative. So that's one example. So some of what we do in the field is we end up studying an idea for 2 to 4 years, and we basically understand the mechanisms of something we sort of already knew, but that ends up being helpful. And then some of the time we discover some, really interesting surprises in the research. And, I'll give you an example of that. It turns out that if you're trying to make a decision, it's almost impossible to take out bias from that decision. And by bias, I mean, accidentally hiring people who are similar to you, or, these kinds of things. So it's almost impossible, when you understand the brain, it's almost impossible to reduce bias by trying on your own. And it turns out that's because it's actually a bottleneck in that you can't make a decision and at the same time be thinking about your bias. In a similar way, you can't do two mathematical tasks at the same moment, right? You have to do one and then the other. So you can't, it's a limit of the brain. You can't be making a decision and be thinking about bias at the same time. It's impossible. You can do one thing, maybe the other. But what this means is that any attempt to reduce bias can't rest on individuals trying to. So you actually need others involved. You need it to be built into systems and processes. So that's an interesting surprise from the literature. It's a real cognitive constraint. But so there are many, many examples. Maybe 2/3 of the research we do ends up being a confirmation, and maybe 1/3 becomes a surprise that we didn't really understand.
Interesting that you mentioned about the insight, the aha moments that leadership can come up when they understand more about the brain. Could you elaborate on the process of generating insight for leaders? What should we do to better generating insight after we understand our brain, pretty much?
I can talk a lot about that, so be careful, Khan. That's my first area of research, and it's still a passion after 15 years of studying this.
It's interesting to come up with new insight. Yeah,
it's fascinating. So, what the mechanism basically is that your conscious brain can only solve fairly simple problems, right? So if I say, what time should you schedule a meeting with a friend tomorrow?
Yeah,
your brain can hold the person, the meeting, the time, and work it out. But if I say, if I give you a complex question, like, what kind of car should you buy based on these 3 variables, it's too much. And what happens is our conscious brain is very limited, but our unconscious resources are incredibly more effective at solving complex problems. When I say incredibly, I mean the unconscious resources are trillions and trillions of times more effective than our conscious resources, right? So what happens is that when we think of a question like, which car should I buy? The unconscious goes to work and looks for information in our past to solve this problem. And it works on the problem. And in fact, there's studies showing that when you think about a question, deep regions of the brain start activating. Now, what happens is that the answer is often found in a small number of memories or distant memories. Right, it's like a small number of neurons in a distant memory, or a book you read, or a subtle answer. So essentially, it's almost like a tickle in the brain. It's like a hunch, and this kind of hunch, we think of it as intuition sometimes. This kind of quiet sense is this feeling that an insight might be coming. It's like the tip of the tongue phenomena, right? What happens is most of the time we don't even hear that hunch because everyday thought is maybe 1 million neurons speaking to each other, and the solution might be 10 neurons speaking to each other. And so we don't hear 10 neurons underneath 1 million neurons. So anything that reduces the noise of the brain makes you more likely to have insights. So insights are basically quiet signals after you've thought of a problem and haven't solved it yet. So you basically want to quiet the brain by shutting your eyes, by thinking slightly optimistically, by switching off devices, maybe going for a walk. Anything that makes your brain quieter and more internally focused will increase the chances of insight. So practically, let's get a practical thing, Khan. People have most of their insights in the morning. Don't look at your emails before you have a shower or you exercise.
All right.
And you'll have a lot more insights, right? Leave your brain quiet in the morning. Maybe on Monday morning or Tuesday morning, leave a few hours. As a leader, leave a few hours where you're not actively trying to solve problems. You're just reflecting. Maybe do some exercise, take a walk, do something where your brain can kind of unfocus a bit. So it's, that's a quick example, but we want to leave space for these quiet signals to come through because our unconscious brain is literally trillions of times more powerful than our conscious brain, but it's also very, very quiet.
That's so interesting. So take a break for your brain. And people talk about meditation and social media detoxing. Would that some practices could be better for the brain nowadays?
Yeah, I mean, the devices that we have keep our brain very, very noisy. So our phones, because it's not just when we interact with them, it's all the things that could come in from our phone. Thinking about a friend who could text us, or a problem we're working on in email, or a dinner we're planning. Like all these things stay in our memory when we see our phone, and it takes up space, it creates noise. There's research showing, it's a couple of years old now, but there's research showing that if you can see your phone, even if it's off, there's a measurable drop in IQ.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh
The only way you don't get a measurable drop in IQ is if your phone is off and you can't see it. If it's on and you can see it, of course, you get a big drop in IQ. But even if it's off and you can see it, you get a drop in IQ. It has to actually be in another room and off, and then it doesn't affect us. And basically, it's because it creates noise in the brain, all these thoughts and activations. I saw some research, I'm not sure how well cited it is, but supposedly we have about 30 times as much information to process as we did about 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And that makes a lot of sense. So all of that makes your brain noisier, which makes it harder to have more insights and even just to think deeply.
Interesting. I know that you have advising many big companies, Fortune 100 list, but let's pick Microsoft for the case study. What exactly did you help Microsoft? What did they change?
Well, it's a very interesting case study. So we started working with them about 8 years ago. We've been working with them a little bit beyond that, about 10, 12 years ago. We helped them in a few ways. But about 8 years ago, Satya Nadella started, and the team brought us in because Satya wanted to really change the culture. And he had a very scientific mind, being an engineer. And he was also very interested in this concept called growth mindset. And they brought us in. What we did was, firstly, we said, culture change, or the success of a culture change, is directly correlating to how many times a day people remember what you want them to do. And so a successful culture change is one that everyone talks about every week. And that literally comes down to how sticky your idea is. And so the first thing that we did was we helped them radically simplify their model for leadership, so it's something everyone could talk about and use. And initially they had a leadership model that was about 7 categories with 5 to 10 things in each. So it was like 40 different elements in 7 categories. No one could remember anything. And we simplified that to 3 things leaders had to do. And this is any manager all the way up. They needed to create clarity, generate energy, and deliver success. Those are the three things leaders had to do: create clarity, generate energy, deliver success. And we built then, underneath that, we built, based on the research, the 3 habits needed to create clarity, for example, the 3 habits for each. So it ended up being a 3x3. But this framework still today is one of the most important and cited and used frameworks in Microsoft. And in fact, they ended up hiring with it, promoting with it, doing performance and feedback against it, assessment, development, everything. So we essentially help them define leadership in a very, very brain-friendly way. And then we built a leadership development solution that was also very brain-friendly, where people learned about the brain itself. So people were becoming better leaders at Microsoft by understanding the human brain moment to moment. And here's the thing, Carm, do you remember The Matrix? Do you remember the movie The Matrix? I think
yes, of course, yes.
Yeah, everyone saw it. Yeah. So in The Matrix, towards the end of the movie, Neo suddenly sees all the data streaming down when he's fighting the agents. It's a big moment in the movie because suddenly he can see that what their plan is and why they're doing things, and he can intervene, and he starts to win, right? And what happens is when you understand the brain, you're getting a real-time sense of what's happening in other people's brains. And you can actually, a bit like Neo in that scene, is you can intervene very, very differently. You become much more adaptive and resourceful. So what we did at Microsoft is we taught all their leaders and managers how to understand the brain in different ways so that they're more adaptive and more effective moment to moment as leaders. And this has proved very, very helpful for them. They've over this time, they've just skyrocketed. Looks like they'll continue to be really successful. So it really helped them shift their culture. So in short, we created a brain-friendly leadership model and then a very brain-friendly leadership development solution that continues. And then we also help them with how to do feedback properly. We built a feedback model, how to build growth mindset in the organization, and a number of other things. So we're a key partner for them with all of human capital. We do a lot there. So it's an interesting case study, especially because we've seen such amazing success in that organization since we started to work with them. Leadership needs to change a little bit in this time, and partially it's leaders being better at managing more hybrid workplaces.
What kind of practices for the companies to create a... So what was the biggest problem for Microsoft at that time? And your framework, create clarity, generate energy, and deliver success.
Yeah, look at that. You can remember it.
Yeah. And what seemed to be the biggest problem for Microsoft at that time? And what kind of area that you focused to solve?
So this has been written about widely. Before Satya came along, there was a lot of talk about their kind of lost decade. So Microsoft were doing very, very, very well for a long time, kind of before the internet really started to take off. Obviously, Microsoft Office and Word and Excel was hugely dominant, and they're very, very, very successful. What happened as the internet started to come is that their model was built on executing their existing strategy and getting better and better at basically selling licenses for Office, right? So their model was about continuing their strategy. And as a result, they missed these signals out there about firstly, the internet browser. They weren't first into that. They should have been. And then they missed search. That was, Google really owns search in many ways. Apologies to Microsoft and Bing, but Google is a much bigger brand in search. So they missed kind of the browser. Then they missed search. Then they missed mobile phones. And then they missed social, which Facebook took. And now, fortunately, they're able to build a cloud business that really made their business really strong. But, without that, they'd be in real trouble. But they missed a number of things. And when they tracked it back, it was because people were competing internally and obsessed with how things always were. So there was a real lack of innovation, and a very, what we call, fixed mindset about how things had to be. So what Satya wanted us to solve for was to make it more of a learn-it-all culture rather than a know-it-all. And so this was about having a growth mindset, which is about, experimenting and learning from others and trying things, as opposed to, things have to be one way. So he really wanted to instill a growth mindset, and we helped them to do that. That was woven into the leadership solution that we built. It was all based on growth mindset. And, what we've seen since then is incredible innovation. And they even beat every other technology firm to get ChatGPT out recently, for better or worse. But it's they've continued to be successful as innovators, where before that they weren't. So I think he's been very successful in creating a real change in innovation.
Yeah, you mentioned and emphasized a lot about the term growth mindset. And it seems to be a very trending word nowadays when we talk about growing your mindsets and changing the way you think. It's always easier said than done. Could you kind of give us some advices on what kind of practices for the companies to create an environment that can foster a growth mindset?
Yeah, so we've been studying and applying growth mindset for over 10 years now. We're really the largest organization in that space. So we're doing more work than anyone. Microsoft, Procter & Gamble, Ford, many organizations using our approach. But essentially, it's the concept is about trying to get better at things rather than trying to look good, right? It's about trying to always improve rather than prove that you're good or bad at something. But it rests on a really deep idea that people are believe that they're either fixed or can get better at something. So, for example, I've been learning piano, and for a long time, I said to myself, I'm just not a reading music person. I'm just much more of an improvising person. I can't really read music. That's just not me. And when I say that, it doesn't leave any space to try or, because I think I'm not innately good. I'm not good. Maybe it's genetic. Maybe it's my brain. I'm not good at reading music, right? Whereas if I say, oh, I'm just not good at reading music yet, right? That's a growth mindset. So I'm just not good at reading music. That's fixed. I'm not good at reading music yet. That's a growth mindset, right? And it's just saying, oh, I might be terrible right now, but I can get better, right? And it's this simple idea. It's a very powerful idea, but it's a very simple idea of noticing in yourself and others when you have a fixed mindset and shifting to a growth mindset, right? So in the pandemic, a lot of people said, I'm not a work from home person. Well, maybe you're not a work from home person yet. You haven't worked out how yet, or I'm not a hybrid person. I want everyone back in the office. Well, maybe you're not a hybrid person yet. So that's the concept. And what we found, and this is collecting data from tens of thousands of people, what we found is that you can teach people this concept, and about a quarter of people that you teach this to every single day catch themselves having a fixed mindset and shift to a growth mindset about something. So people really use this. And most people, like 90 to 95% of people, use this tool at 1 to 3 times a week. So 1 to 3 times a week, most people, like 90 to 95% of people, go, oh, okay, that's a fixed mindset about that customer. I should have a growth mindset, or that's a fixed mindset about that technology project. So it's about noticing in yourself and others. So that's a habit, right? What I've just described to you is a habit of noticing and shifting, and it's very teachable. And in order to create change in an organization of any size, whether it's a company of 10 people or 100 people or 100,000 people, you've got to make this concept a priority. And Satya Nadella was very good at that. He talked about it all the time. You then need to actually teach the right habits to people and get them building these habits. But then you also need systems that support a growth mindset, right? So the systems are important. So for example, if the way you hire people is such that you only hire people who've done every single part of a job before, then you're kind of hiring with a fixed mindset, right? But if you hire people who've done some of the job before, but it would be a stretch to do this job. Now you're hiring for a growth mindset. And it turns out those are often much better performers because they're learning new things and they're growing and they're much more engaged as a result, right? So a fixed mindset says hire people who have done everything. A growth mindset says hire people that can stretch. Mm-hmm. And so there's a growth mindset way of hiring and giving feedback and promoting and developing. And it's all about helping people get better rather than trying to, look good. So, for example, performance management, if you have a fixed rating and everyone is going to be rated a number, you're going to force people to try to justify their performance. They're going to try to look good. They're not going to experiment or tell you about their learning, right? They want the rating. Whereas if you instead do what we did with Microsoft and say, hey, let's have conversations about getting better. Now your performance management is based on getting better, not based on trying to look good. So you can weave the concept into systems in a really powerful way.
Right. Interesting. So when you talk to a lot of corporate leaders nowadays, especially now 2023, we are in like a turbulent times and the economic downturns and a lot of changing world right now. What seem to be the biggest challenges when it comes to leadership style?
Yeah, leadership needs to change a little bit in this time. And partially it's leaders being better at managing more hybrid workplaces, right? So partially it's leaders need to manage, some folks who are in the office, some who are out. And the hybrid workplace is probably here to stay in many organizations. And it has many, many benefits that might be not obvious. But so partially it's managing the hybrid workplace. It's also leaders need to be, as a result of that, leaders need to be more focused on outcomes and less focused on surveillance. So there needs to be a shift from surveillance mindset to outcomes mindset. That's a big one. And many leaders are accidentally, if they don't see people every day, they accidentally become kind of anxious and suspicious, and they want people to report on every single thing they did. And it's kind of insulting and depressing when you have to do that. So shifting to more of an outcomes mindset rather than a surveillance mindset, that's important. There's a big importance of empathy. So managers need a lot more empathy than they've ever had before.
So outcome mindset rather than just surveillance.
Yeah. But the empathy is another thing. It just really this is one of the biggest complaints employees have had is that managers didn't show enough empathy. So that's really a big one.
With the understanding of the brain, how can that support the understanding of empathy or the ability to show empathy to everyone at the office?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Empathy. So we studied empathy for a few years, and empathy is not easy by trying to understand people. In fact, if you try to understand people, you end up becoming more confident, but not more accurate in understanding them. It's a little strange. So if I tell you, Khan, try to understand your friends or partner or whatever more, and you just try to think about them more, you don't get any more accurate in understanding them. What you have to do is ask good questions. And when you ask good questions, you can really understand people more, right? So we've seen that that trying to put your mind into other people's mind doesn't work very well. You can't. And we've also understood that empathy comes in a few different elements. So there's a sort of automatic element of empathy, which is sort of sensing how people are feeling. But the cognitive element of empathy is the critical piece, and that involves asking questions. And then there's a third element of empathy, which is acting, which is doing something about it. And that's a really important piece. So you're not just understanding people, but you're taking action in some way. So we think of it as empathy as having three stages: notice, understand, and act. And you kind of have to do all three to really show empathy. It's a powerful idea.
So if you don't understand your brain, what kind of blind spot that you have when you leading an organization or a company or a team?
So many. Yeah. There's often a really big gap between your intent and your impact as a leader. There's a really big gap between your intent, like what you want to achieve, and what ends up happening, right? Like example, you might not want to share much information with your team about a project because you don't, everything's not all final. But uncertainty is very painful for the brain. So if people feel really uncertain about what's happening, they would rather hear even a little bit of information than no information, right? So that's an example. But probably the most common thing is leaders don't understand that they make people anxious before they say anything. They raise people's blood pressure. So if you're the team leader or the CEO, when you talk to the people under you, you literally make them uncomfortable, right? You increase their stress response before you say a word. And the reason for that is that higher status people make us uncomfortable. When we talk to someone with more power or more status, it activates a danger response in our body, right? Because we feel less important, they're more important. And so leaders often don't understand that the people are already anxious. And then what they've got to do is reduce that anxiety in every interaction so that people literally make better decisions. This is similar to the phone issue, right? A phone makes you less intelligent because it makes your brain noisy. Well, being the boss makes your team's brain noisy as well. There was a funny study that was done. How far from your boss should you sit to be the most creative and effective? And the answer was across the country. Like if your boss is in the other side of the country, that's when you're most productive. Okay, right?
It's good to know.
The further the better. So this is probably the biggest blind spot, is not recognizing that there's a baseline of stress and that a lot of the things that we do as leaders accidentally make that stress much worse just in the way we approach people. So our intent might be to, give feedback so that people perform better. But the way we give that feedback, especially when folks are already stressed, the way we give that feedback creates an even bigger stress because of people's status being attacked. So one of the things here is, instead of attacking someone's status by saying, "Hey, you messed up on that project, and here's why," you can ask someone a question like, "Hey, what do you think you would do differently next time on this project?" Now, instead of that person defending themselves, they're actually much more likely to be honest and open. So if you understand that the brain takes feedback very personally, the brain reacts to feedback very intensely, you'll try to avoid that threat response when giving feedback. So that's one example. So there's a lot of blind spots, but a lot of them are around accidentally creating threats, which is not what you intended. You intended to try to be helpful, instead you upset someone. That's probably the biggest category. The other category is around bias, is that we often have a lot of bias without kind of realizing it. Particularly if you're forcing people back into the office, even part-time. About a third of people will be delighted with that because they want to be back in the office. But about a third of people are really unhappy.
Yeah, it's interesting to realize that we'll have a lot of mistake when we treat people from a leadership perspective. One of the concepts that you have developed is the SCAF model. I want to mention it, which identify 5 social domains that influence human behavior in the social situation: the status, the certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. So could you elaborate on how to apply those models to create a positive work culture at the organization?
Yeah, so SCARF is something I spent years researching and then published in 2008. I spent about 4 years putting this together. And then in 2008, we published it, and it's been very, very, very helpful to a lot of people. So SCARF describes the 5 elements that create threats or rewards in the brain. And generally, threat is much stronger. So if you say to someone, "Hey, that was a dumb idea that you said in that meeting," you can't balance it out by saying, "Oh, but you look really great today," right? The status threat of saying you made a mistake is much worse than the status reward of "you look great," right? So So the threats are generally much stronger than the rewards. And what SCARF does is it tells you, ideally ahead of time, what could happen when you share a communication or give feedback or plan something or roll out a change. Like, it's a way of thinking ahead of time how people might react, right? And then planning ahead of time to reduce those SCARF threats, right? Let me give you an example. If you were going to close down lots of your offices so people didn't have their own office anymore, that would be an attack on people's status. If they had an office, they would be pretty upset to lose their office, and an attack on their sense of autonomy or control, and maybe an attack on their sense of certainty, right? They don't know what's happening, and maybe less relatedness. They don't know, and it might seem unfair. They worked so hard for that office, right? So that would make people upset. Now, what could you do to balance that? How could you create a reward in one of the SCARF domains? There's two that you could probably do. One is you could provide certainty. So you could lay out exactly what's going to happen and how it's going to look. But even more powerful might be to give people some more autonomy. And autonomy is about having control, or a feeling of control. So now maybe you give people this sense of control by letting them come in more variably, or letting them choose when they come in or how they come in or what they work on. So look, we're taking away your office, but you can now choose what to work on much more, for example, right? So it balances out. So you're looking at how are we creating a threat and how can we create a reward to balance that out. So it's a way of thinking about all your interactions ahead of time, or while you're doing something, if it's going badly, or maybe after the fact. It gives you almost like the primary colors of what creates threats and what creates rewards. And generally, as a manager, you want rewards, not threats. Most interactions, you want people feeling optimistic and positive and engaged, not anxious and frustrated.
So we should try to create rewards for those 5 elements in an organization, right?
Absolutely. So you can think about SCARF in a systemic way, and look at, for example, back to performance management. Look at your performance management system. We said you could look at it through the lens of growth mindset. You can also look at it through the lens of SCARF. Does it attack people's status? Does it feel unfair, right? Do people feel like they have any control? And you can tweak your performance management system so that you're not attacking status so much, so people have more control, right? And it feels more fair. This will be a better system if you make those changes. So you can look at all your talent practices, from hiring to performance management to learning to workforce planning. You can look at all your talent practices against SCARF and see where you might accidentally be creating threats. And also you can look at all your products through the lens of SCARF and say, how do we bump up the feeling of status people get, or the feeling of fairness people get, from this product? So you can use it as a lens for many things. It's basically a framework for thinking about improving human interactions of all kinds.
Good to know. Thank you. Do you have any challenges or limitation in applying neuroscience research to the leadership development?
There are a lot of limitations. I mean, we don't understand everything about the brain, but there are a subset of things we know a lot about. And so we focus on those, but we don't know everything. We can't measure people's brains and predict who will be a good leader. It's much too noisy, too many variables. And of course, you can't force anything on anyone. You can build a compelling experience for people to learn about their brain, but you can't, force someone to learn about themselves. Some people don't want to know about themselves at all. They don't want to know particularly about other people. They just want to drive. And there are some people who are very, very goal focused and not very people focused. You can't necessarily change that, but you can certainly speak to very rational people through this lens.
So there's no way to measure the success or the effectiveness of a NeuroLeadership intervention
we can.
programs.
No, we can measure. We do measure.
How can you measure that?
So we measure. So when we work with an organization, there's two main things that we do. One is we'll design a strategy like we did at Microsoft. But the bigger work that we do is executing that strategy. And ultimately that's about building habits, right? So if we're helping a company build a growth mindset, we know that success looks like nearly everyone shifting their mindset every week. And we can measure that. We know what that habit looks like. So we can poll people and actually identify the number of times a week people are shifting their mindset. And so we can absolutely see the success of new habits at any scale. And we've collected some data. We worked with a company, we worked with Boeing, the airplane manufacturer, and we helped them build a culture of speaking up. And we measured the increase in speaking up after the initiative. And this went to all 140,000 people. We measured it and we found that very, very good results in terms of an increase in speaking up about a month after the initiative. But a year later, that number actually was even better. So it had really embedded. So we had created a true shift in the speaking up culture. It wasn't just a bump from some training. It really lasted. And that's what we're looking for. We're looking for long-lasting, sustained change.
Sure.
In the form of habits that really become part of a company's fabric. So you mentioned before we do, executive coaching and leadership development, these kinds of things. The thing that we do most of all that we're best known for is we think of it as whole of company transformation.
Yeah.
So a company says, hey, look, we've got 1,000 people, 10,000, 100,000 people. They're really spread out. They're all over Vietnam. We can work out a strategy to impact all of them, like very quickly, using digital tools. And then measure the impact on maybe how innovative people are now or how much they're speaking up, this kind of thing. So there is a way to measure, and it comes down to anchoring on habits.
Yep, sure. So nowadays people talk a lot about quiet quitting. How can we understand quiet quitting from a neuroscience perspective?
I mean, it's the same as disengagement. It's not a new concept. It's just much more prevalent because people are still very scarred from the pandemic. I mean, people are still really hurting from what happened. So it's not necessarily a new concept, but it's just much more prevalent, I think, out there. And particularly if you're forcing people back into the office, even part-time, about a third of people will be delighted with that because they want to be back in the office. But about a third of people are really unhappy about that because they're more productive and healthier working at home. They do better work and they're more balanced and better parents, right? And more healthy. Everything's better. So about a third of people really want to stay home. If you force those people back into the office, a good number of them are going to be pretty resentful. And it'll look like they're working, but they're really not. Their heart's not in it. Even their mind's not in it. They're not really there. So I think that's one of the issues. And the challenge is, it looks better from a manager's perspective to bring people back because the manager feels more status, right? The manager feels more certain. The manager feels more autonomy, the more in control. They even feel more connectedness with people. So it feels good for the manager. So maybe 3 or 4 of the scarf domains are nudged to the positive, right? But to the employee, especially ones who are more effective at home, it's a drop in status, a drop in autonomy, a drop in fairness. So it's 3 things. And remember, the negative is much stronger than the positive. So the employees are much more annoyed than the managers are comfortable. And the result is quiet quitting. So that's one variable that's happening. And I just think also a lot of people were just overwhelmed by events of the last few years and still kind of recovering from that. And so there's a lot of general burnout in the workplace as well.
So how do you see the field of neuroleadership evolving in the next 5 to 10 years? What kind of new insight or discoveries are you expecting to see?
I mean, we're constantly studying new things. Lots of people are asking us about AI right now.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's an interesting topic. So, we'll continue to study new things as they happen. What we're interested at the moment is how to scale our work a little bit more. So we're exploring ways of really scaling. We impacted 5 million people last year. So 5 million people learned about their brain and became better leaders, better employees, better parents, better partners through learning about their brain. So we're thinking internally, how do we go from 5 million to 50 million? How do we really change the game? And we're challenging ourselves to have more of a growth mindset and change the way we do things. So that's an interesting journey for us. And just I think something like Scarf has a lot of relevance to places beyond just organizations, so schools and the public sector. So we're looking at ways to get this out more widely as well.
All right. So by scaling your business, I hope that the Vietnamese CEOs and corporate leaders could benefit from that as well. And I know that NeuroLeadership Institute's programs has come to Vietnam with the collaboration with the Nguyen Company to do events and workshop here. Could you talk a little bit more about that and your expansion plan in Vietnam's market?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're excited about the collaboration with Nguyen, and I think it's important to have local partners for these kinds of things. There's a lot of opportunities to expand in the Vietnamese market. I'm passionate about the culture and the people, and there's some great organizations there. So we're excited to have the partnership with Nguyen to explore that. And I think you'll see lots of great opportunities to learn about our work in coming months.
Great. Definitely want to see more of your programs here in Vietnam. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's Dr. David Rock, co-founder and CEO of NeuroLeadership Institute. I guess we have to study more about our brain in order to be a better leaders. Please support us by subscribing to this channel, Vietsuccess, and follow us on different podcast platforms on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. So I'll see you next time. Thank you, David.
Thank you very much, Khan. Take care.
Thank you.